As someone with a fascination in history and historical fashion, I wanted to know how the masks of 1918 compared to the masks of today. To do this, I needed to make a 1918 genuine influenza mask, and I needed to find an article to tell me how to do so. So like the beginning of any research project, I scoured my known sources, articles, newspapers, anything that would help me find the information I needed to make this mask. And I eventually came across the holy grail of primary resource databases, the Influenza Encyclopedia by the University of Michigan Center of the History of Medicine. And I'm not affiliated with them, but their website is an incredible resource, database, everything you need to find about the influenza outbreak in America. So check their website out, and I'll leave a link in the description. Eventually, I came across an article from the Oakland Inquirer from October of 1918 explicitly giving directions on how to make a proper mask. The directions stated under the title of the article were provided by the Red Cross. So my estimation is that these masks were standard across the entire United States, with some variation of course, because this article was made for the information of normal people who wanted to make their own masks instead of factories producing these masks in the United States, as I'll talk about later. Starting off the material to make the mask, cotton gauze was often the first choice to make face masks as directed in the article. Although in other articles from 1918 and 1919, cheesecloth was often a popular choice of masks because it was breathable and people already had them in their homes, so they didn't have to go out and buy new fabric. Before this project, I wanted to follow the directions as close as possible to get the most genuine 1918 face mask possible, so I used cotton gauze for my face mask. I used a plain white 100% cotton gauze as they would have had in 1918. Medical gauze is very different today than the gauze of 1918, the gauze they would have used for these masks, because manufactured gauze today is very, very loose in the weave, and it's not what we're looking for this mask, as it wouldn't really entirely be effective to prevent influenza. My fabric was a bit longer than the 36-inch wide and the 36-inch long strip as specified in the first step, so I cut my gauze to match those measurements. Next, step B instructs to divide the fabric into 9 strips inches wide. After some folding and checking with the measurements from the following steps, the word divide in this step means to cut the fabric into 9-inch wide strips, which left me with 4 strips of equally measured gauze to make 4 masks. Step C instructs to then proceed to fold each strip into halves, then fold those halves into thirds. Since I only wanted to make one mask, I only did this to one of the strips of gauze from the first step. Then I checked the fabric's thickness, as it says in step C that there should only be 6 layers of gauze in total, and since mine matched the description, I proceeded on to the next step. Step D states to turn in all of the raw edges, and since I folded my mask to conceal both top and bottom raw strips of fabric, I only needed to turn in the sides of the mask and not all 4 sides. It does state that you can do this by machine or by hand, but after I struggled with my machine for a bit, I decided to do this all by hand. After sewing all of the sides as stated in the directions, I then measured the masks, and with rounding it ended up to be 6 inches by 8 inches, only an inch off from the directions specifications. Step E specifies that there needs to be 3 pleats on each side of the mask, with the lowest pleat being the largest of all 3. The instructions didn't specify how deep the pleats should be or what direction I should fold the pleats in. So I looked for pictures to inform my decisions with both of these measurements. I found this picture of a nurse who also has a gauze mask with 3 pleats in it, and by looking at the photograph, I estimated how long the mask should measure with the pleats around the ear and which directions the pleats should be facing from the outside. After making the pleats with these specifications in mind, I was done with the base of the mask. Step F gives instructions for the tapes, or the ties of the mask. And the lengths of the tapes on the upper corners should be 13 inches, and on the lower corners it should be 11 inches. Tape in this instance usually indicates some sort of bias tape or twill tape, but since I had quite a bit of twill tape, I used that for the straps. My tape measured to be about 1 inch wide, which was too long for the specified measurements of how wide the tape should be, which was 1/4 wide and 1/2 inch or 5/6 inches wide. So I folded over each tape to make it 1/2 inch, measuring up to how long the tape should be. After folding the tape, I hand sewed the edges of the tapes to secure the edges, and I finally sewed them onto the corresponding corners of the mask. Now the last instruction states to put a piece of black thread through the mask to designate from the outside. The instructions weren't clear on how to do this, so I looked up supplemental resources to understand how to do this on my own mask and keep it historically accurate. From a newspaper article, Behind the Scenes in a Flu Mask Factory, published in 1918 by the Cleveland Press, the black thread was mentioned in a factory setting. As Miss J.H. Dana states, "We knot a bit of black thread in the center of the mask. It only shows on one side and indicates the outside. Of course, the mask ought to be worn always the same way to keep infection from your nose." This bit of information tells me quite a bit about the mask. Now, the first thing it told me is that the thread should always be in the center of the mask, which was important to placement, as I originally thought it could have been placed on the bridge of the nose, but it was in the center of the mask. The second piece of information this article gave me insight into is that it should be knotted into the mask and should only show from the outside and not be visible from the inside. But unfortunately, this article wasn't enough on its own, so I found another article which gave me enough information that I needed to finally finish the mask. In another article, How to Wear a Mask and Beat Influenza, published by the St. Paul Pioneer Press in November 1918, one sentence told me all I needed to know and how to finish this mask. The outside of the face mask is marked with a black thread woven into it. This was the key word that I needed. Woven. It's woven into the mask. Now, since the black thread is not visible in any pictures I've come across, keeping in mind that pictures from the past weren't exactly clear as day, I could not see any black thread, so I concluded that this thread was not woven on the outermost layer of gauze, but on the second layer from the outside of the gauze, so it wouldn't be as visible in pictures that we see, but it would still be visible to the naked eye. So for my mask, I ran a black thread in the center of the mask and ended up picking up some layers of the inner layers of the gauze, since remember that my mask is 6 pieces of fabric thick, so it still didn't show on the other side. No, it had more of a woven quality to it, which is what I was achieving. And with that, my 1918 influenza mask was done. To test the breathability of the mask, I used a lighter to see if I could blow out the flame, and with the first mask, the influenza mask, I was able to
get the flame a little bit, so it had quite a bit of breathability to it. And for the second mask, I'm using my own mask that I made, and I personally like this one a bit better. I feel like it's more comfortable, and I obviously wouldn't recommend wearing the influenza mask in public anyway. But this mask worked a lot better, and as you can see in a minute, I tried really hard to blow out this candle, and I wasn't able to, so it works pretty efficiently. If you're interested, I'm selling these homemade masks on my Etsy, and the link is in the description.
Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! The directions as stated under the title the directions stated under